Hello, my name is Ronni, and today I'm going to be talking about systematic racism in the educational system, specifically in Western New York. So, a few weeks ago, I asked my 8th grade sister and a few of her friends to picture a high school student, and I told them to picture the cap, picture the gown, everything. And then I asked them what race the student was. And most of them said that the student they pictured was white, despite most of them being African American students. In the United States, racial inequality for Black children has been normalized in the educational system, leaving them with academic struggles that other children just don't face. And this affects them not only in the present, in their academics, but it also affects them in the future when they want to get jobs and pursue real things in life. American author Rachel Cargle once wrote that white feelings should never be held in a higher regard than Black lives. And the educational system in this country, compared to Black students, white students are sort of coddled, and there's just a racism that is so ingrained that it's hard to break out of and really hard to find a solution for. Up until May of 1954, schools were segregated, and this came to an end when Brown versus the Board of Education occurred, which integrated schools. But even after this, there was still students that couldn't get into the schools, as well as Brown versus the Board of Education actually eliminated a lot of jobs for Black educators who were previously working in segregated schools. When this passed, students' grades went up significantly, and according to the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which is the SAT, the scores of African American students actually climbed 54 points between 1976 and 1994, while those of white students remained stable because they already had the opportunity. Since at least the 1990s, white students have tested higher in numerous subjects than Black students. White students were averaging 230, while Black students were averaging only about 204, according to the NAEP. Black students progress slower when it comes to education, but when only 6% of teachers in the nation are Black, it's a little bit harder. So just to give you a visual representation of that, in the U.S., there are 240,000 teachers that are Black out of the 4 million educators, and this is, to my knowledge, from K through college, according to Good Morning America. So what that looks like is 6% of all educators are going to be Black. That's the educators that are Black. Over here, Black students in the U.S., K through 12, there's 8 million of them out of 50 million. So that's going to be about 15 or 16% of students that identify as Black, which there could be more because it doesn't include students that are maybe mixed that identify as both races. It's just specifically Black. So that is going to look like that. And this is just K through 12. So as you can see, there's a great difference between those two, just even the numbers. When you have 8 million students that are Black that need support in the classroom, the statistic there is a little bit alarming. So one teacher from Buffalo, actually after the recent mass shooting, asked if the shooter went to a school that had any cultural sensitivities where they taught anything about different ethnic backgrounds and what those people made towards America. Which was a very interesting question. The Washington Post brought this up, and it's a good question because when you don't have educators that are, able to teach those type of things, and you have a country that wants to skip over it, it's really hard to educate and move forward with getting rid of that systematic racism. So to specify a little bit to Western New York, Western New York consists of 8 counties, and in those counties, there's about 2.8 million people, with about 30% of the population being Black people, according to BuffaloNiagara.org. What that means is that there's about 30% of Black people, but they're not all spread out through 8 of those counties. Most of them are going to be in the poorer neighborhoods, and this is visible when we look at the statistics of how the high schools are doing. So in Western New York, the highest ranking high schools are all located in white suburbs such as Williamsville, East Aurora, and Orchard Park. And the worst ranking schools are in the inner city of Buffalo, according to a Buffalo Brief. And according to the article, the main reason for this divide is the severe differences in poverty concentration in the districts. National research has shown that the income is the most powerful predictor of educational success for individual students, schools, and school districts. And a 2013 report by the PPG found that 3/4 of the variation in test scores among local schools could be explained by their percentage of students with low incomes. So what this means is that Buffalo is a big city known for redlining, and basically that's when you kind of just shove lower income families in like certain housing areas, and those areas, their schools have the lowest test scores, and those are going to be our Black students in our community, which is very telling and a huge problem. Educators are a huge barrier to improving this problem because students have received lower grades as young as 6 when they're Black. So compared to their white peers, they're receiving lower grades even at the age of 6. And this can partially be due to educators not understanding their circumstances, not understanding their home life, not trying to help, not trying to educate them in ways that they need to learn, just simply not caring about them. And that's really hard to combat. So since this country has been founded, there has been this disregard for the Black body, which has been normalized. And Black students are supposed to receive the same education as white students and the same treatment as white students. And we can clearly see that there's a gap in the graduation rates, and there's a gap in just the performance rates of students, which when there's a gap like that and students are not treated fairly based on the basis of their race, students are actually pushed towards dropping out of high school as well as turning to violence and criminal activity. So in solving this a little bit, that would not only help the students, but it would help the community as a whole, because more people will be graduating, more people will be ready to go into the working world, and less people have to feel like they need to turn to criminal activity. So I think there's a few solutions to this problem, but it's really hard to hire more black educators in a system that's kind of already is what it is. So I think the best solution for the problem would be to educate the educators that we already have, which means sensitivity training for educators, which means training for teachers every single year, probably multiple terms a year, which you might have to put a extra cost towards in order to pay the teachers to do these things. But there needs to be training in how to treat these students from kindergarten and up. There needs to be training on how the needs of these students, what are they going home to, how does that affect their academics, and there also needs to be a training on how to relate to these students, because they have such different lives than their teachers when you're walking around classrooms and you can't relate to anyone. So there just needs to be some type of training. I think that is the most realistic option. And there would need to be some funding from that, which probably would have to come from the city board and the school board, just so that teachers are compensated for their time. But I think that the best option would be to educate the educators in how to better care for the students that don't look as much like them, and ideally to hire more Black educators in the future. But the most prominent immediate change would come from informing teachers. But thank you, and that's all.